You're listening to the Middlemen podcast, this week with Scott Messer and Tom Lemongello. Hey, Scott, you back from Ramp Up?
Ramp Up was really great. I got to tell you, such an amazing time with the greatest density of data professionals ever. And it's a really fantastic conference.
I definitely felt the FOMO not going. My calendar's pretty full right now, going down to the Commerce Media Brand Summit in Atlanta on Monday, and then Marketecture with you. Then I've even got a new event that I'm going to, the Point of Care POC Now Summit, which is in the pharma space. So it is a busy spring, but yeah, data is really important. And I think actually this episode that we're going to be talking about how agentic commerce is coming into the conversation. It was something that I think we've held off in talking about, but it really is it's a data discussion, and it's sort of an infrastructural shift that is reminiscent of the e-commerce world. And the guest that we have, Sharon Gee from Commerce, is going to talk about the fact that it's not as crazy as it sounds. The old infrastructure that you needed to be in Google Merchant Center is kind of the same thing that you need to be in these new agentic protocols. And I think that's a good grounding for how things work. But she was good to spar with. And I think you were talking about who wins and who loses. And there's some really interesting parts of that towards the end of this episode.
It certainly was. And I took a little bit of a pessimistic view into this, and I wanted to talk about the winners and losers that we see as we shift. And she did a great job explaining sort of the beginning of commerce and why feeds were important and how they really framed out like the web 2.0 that we've been in. And as we move into this new era, and I'm not going to call it web 3,
because please do not. Yeah.
As we move into the agentic era of browsing and commerce, I had a lot of questions about like, how does that rewrite the relationships that brands as advertisers and agencies, websites, consumers, merchants of record, like how do
and retailers, and for me, multi-brand retailers was another one where what is, and it hasn't been written yet, but it's they're drafting it. So
I think if you ask Sharon, like it's been written, we're just about to, like, we haven't just gotten to that chapter yet. So that was really fascinating. And I got to say, one of the places where I really pushed hard was in the losers section. And I was intimating that retargeting of users was going to be greatly impacted because in agentic browsing, they're not coming to your site to do things, but you will get them as a consumer if they actually buy something, but you won't be able to retarget them. And so that may have a big impact on some of our favorite companies, particularly like a French well-known retargeting company.
But I think that they would be very, very happy to hear that retargeting is dying, because they've been trying to change that narrative when they moved into commerce media. And now it sounds like they're moving into this agentic world too.
And that's the update that I have from when I talked to Sharon and reading the news now, seeing that Criteo is powering some of OpenAI's ad tech that they're going to use for their ads beta that they're running. Seeing that, it's probably not like what we used to think of Criteo, but it's most of that IPON web acquisition and building ad tech for companies and being able to create solutions. So without having done a lot of research, and we should get Criteo and IPON web back on here to talk about it. Yeah. I think that this may be their greatest opportunity and a great justification of like the skills and tools that they've been assembling, and like they're meeting the call.
Well, they also need to be given some credit that they went as deep as they did on Google Sandbox and didn't get much for that. So
absolutely. So it was a fascinating conversation. I think our listeners will really like it. Sharon is concise and precise. And you're going to love some of the metaphors. And if you like skid steers and tractors, like this is definitely your episode.
Yep. Yeah. I've already started editing this episode. And when she gets animated, she gets full screen because she gets into it, and she's got some great examples. So it was great talking to her. And yeah, I mean, this is the beginning of a conversation that's gonna reappear on the Middlemen. So let's get into it. Hello, welcome to the Middlemen podcast. We are here today with Sharon Gee. Did I pronounce that correctly?
That's right. Yeah.
She is SVP of Product and AI for Feedonomics at a company called Commerce, which may sound like you might have heard of that. I know that Big Commerce is part of your whole organization, but tell us what this company is that you work for first before we get into any of this.
Yeah. So a little bit of background. I joined Big Commerce 6.5 years ago to lead the relationships with the channel partners, Google, Meta, TikTok, Amazon. As part of that company, I helped lead the acquisition strategy for a company called Feedonomics, which is a market-leading data feed management platform, because merchants have good data and they need to send it to all the sales channels they have to drive discovery in this kind of omnichannel world at the time. We acquired a company called MakeSwift, which is a Next.js React front-end visual editor. And so with these three brands, BigCommerce, Feedonomics, and MakeSwift, we needed a parent brand. Commerce is the through line. It's the parent brand that holds the brands, BigCommerce, Feedonomics, and MakeSwift, which are all part of the company.
The reason I think we got connected was I was at NRF and I was talking to one of your colleagues, Matt. And I think that what was interesting for me was we kind of waited. We didn't really go headlong into LLM surfaces for advertising because it was very loud and everybody was making noise about it. But it was a lot of protocol talk and it wasn't that interesting, to be honest. And so when I had a great chat with him and he introduced me to you, I thought it was a really good time to sort of talk about what does it mean to be the merchant of record? Yep. What are the requirements for that? It seems to me, and Todd and I, the other co-host on Middlemen, we came from a background working in the Shopify ecosystem. So we saw firsthand how smaller merchants who don't have a really good handle on their first party data, they need these services like Feedonomics to get their product catalogs in there. In this world, your company and others in this space are getting to be super interesting and important as LLMs start to have protocols that say, I need a merchant of record to pull products into a chat interface.
That's right.
So tell us about what it's like working in that environment and what's happening.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of background. So it's not new for third-party channels to need catalog data. Google, in order to run product listing ads, has needed catalog data for like a decade, right?
Yep.
Same thing with Meta and TikTok and Amazon, right? If you want to list on Amazon, you have to provide them a bunch of information about the product, title, description, image, bunch of additional attributes to list on a marketplace. So let's think about it in eras. We had like kind of the advertising era, where as a merchant, if you had an e-commerce platform, you could sync your catalog data to Google and they would start to drive discovery of your products with a product listing ad or organic listings. Because when you're searching and looking for information, hey, I'm looking for a linen dress in a size 10 from this brand, that information has to be provided to the search engine. So you start with search, right? So feeds is this kind of anachronism of send my data to the channel so it knows about my products. That started with Google and with Meta and Microsoft ads, all of these advertising programs. That same data then powered the social shopping kind of era, and then the marketplaces era. And now we're just into the next one where there are new channels who also need the catalog data, the agentic era, right? Where you have ChatGPT and Perplexity and Copilot and Gemini, and they all need catalog data because they can't create a beautiful shopping experience where I ask for the thing that I'm looking for and the agent knows about it and can answer all of the questions about that product just by relying on scraped data. They need quality data because when you're scraping, it might not have real-time inventory and pricing. And then they're surfacing, 404 links of products that are out of inventory. That's not a good experience. So these answer engines need feeds, just like every other channel before them has, in order to be able to answer shopper queries. And now that all these eyeballs are moving, faster than ever to these answer engine channels that all of us are using, they realize that query volume requires good catalog data from merchants of record. And so that's really the role we play. We have always sat between merchant systems, right? Their PIM, their ERP, their e-commerce platform, and taken that data and then massaged it into the format that the channel needs in order to surface that product.
Beautiful carousels, yeah.
Yeah, when someone is looking for it. And so the problem is not new, but the data and the channels is new. And so you said protocols. And so everyone like went crazy. Oh my gosh, why are there all these new protocol announcements? And the answer is because when you collapse the funnel, it used to be you would, buy a product ad on Google, and then, you would capture some attention. It would plop you on a product detail page or a product listing page. And then you as a merchant would pray for 2 to 5% conversion rate on your .com. That's been collapsed now. Now people are asking these answer engines for their, for their queries, and they're telling them their life story. And so the context has to be surfaced before they ever even get to your site. In some cases, they might not even get to your site anymore. We're seeing organic traffic drop because answer engines are providing the answer you need when you're doing product research. So now you discover and buy, in some cases, that product all within that same agentic chat interface. And that means that the merchants have to expose that data, not just the catalog data that was powering search, but they need to power the data that actually allows transaction to happen on that channel. Tax calculation, shipping calculation, the ability to route an order, all of that payment, like a tokenized payment. All of that is really important. And what it means is there are new protocols required for the data to go back and forth between merchant systems and these channels. And that's the same thing we've been doing forever, which is sitting between merchant systems and the channels that can drive them growth. It's just new protocols that we need to send the data across. So if data is the oil, the protocol is the pipeline. It's just how does it get to the place that it needs to go? And so that's really what we're seeing is the difference. There's a lot of noise in the space around these new protocols. Agentic commerce protocol with Stripe and OpenAI, universal commerce protocol with Google and others, the new payments protocols with PayPal and Stripe. We support them all. We need to understand that there's a new consumer behavior that is seismic in its impact, but understanding what's happening allows the merchants to make choices and understand that ultimately the data is the storefront, the customer's the channel, and agents are now customers too.
Okay. I really like all of that. But as the tinfoil hat member of the podcast, I got a lot of questions.
Ready.
And I'm gonna back up a little bit in your story of let's get back to the fear part of agentic commerce is going to wipe out businesses. Right. And so why should retailers participate in agentic commerce and hand over their feeds? Let me give you some more preface there. Every time that a seller of some sort has sort of gotten into these platforms, it has become more expensive for them, more opaque for them, and just one more thing to go through. So why shouldn't retailers resist this? And what data do they get back? Because they don't own the user. And we're going to talk about some companies that may not have as big of a role to play in the future here. I'll answer that question later. But why should retailers be in this channel and bring their feeds with them?
Yeah, why play the game? I'm going to contend with you. That makes a good podcast. This is not a marketplace play. In agentic channels, the merchant is merchant of record. So I did not say that it's going to ruin businesses. What I said was that it was going to change where the traffic originates for search and checkout. So it doesn't mean that your business is over. You are the merchant of record. You're the person who has to fulfill the order. At last I checked, OpenAI is not saying, and now we're Amazon. They're not. They actually are saying, hey, we need to partner with merchants who are merchant of record, where they own the relationship on the return, the exchange, the loyalty. So why would a merchant want to have their products visible on the channels where all the eyeballs are going? For the same reason they've had it on Google for a decade. And it's because they need to be able to have their products referenced when somebody asks a question and someone's doing discovery. They're more akin to a search channel than they are to a marketplace channel, because the merchant owns the customer. It just originates on that channel and the initial checkout happens on the channel, if in the cases of checkout. But in most cases, it's actually an affiliate link, because they're scraping right now. They're scraping a site and sending you traffic. So my answer would be because it's actually the acquisition channel where all the eyeballs are going.
Okay. I'll take that. In a parallel universe, when TV shows were able to be recorded by TiVo, everybody forgot what channel Dancing with the Stars is on. I bet you I could ask you any show that you watch right now, and you probably can't even remember whether it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime. to most degrees, and they just show up in UIs and things, and they're there for you. So there's a little bit of like a loss of branding here, and the customer may not even really, do they really know where they checked out from, or do they just know that the package is going to be there in 2 days?
Well, they certainly know whether they're buying Nike shoes or not.
They know whether they're buying Nike shoes or not, but do they know if it came from Nike, Amazon, Foot Locker, or Walmart?
I think what you're focusing on is the multi-brand retailer, and is there challenge and risk to a multi-brand retailer? Absolutely true. Yes, there is challenge and risk there, right? How do you mitigate, or how do you compete in this world where the value that you used to be providing, which is discoverability of multiple brands in a space where that discoverability is now happening within an answer engine? Yeah, there's a big change in dynamics there. And so when we think about like, not all of the companies in retail are created equal. If you're a branded manufacturer, you're manufacturing products, of course you're going to want that product data on the channels, right? Like we mentioned, Nike, Lululemon, Estee Lauder, Dell, those companies really want their products discoverable across those channels, right? Because they need it when somebody says, hey, what's the best laptop for my 9-year-old who's going to school? They want to be able to show up when that answer happens.
Yeah, but how does it impact Best Buy?
Yeah. Well, I think what's really interesting that we're finding is that, as you can imagine, we see the same pattern of adoption. When a new channel emerges, always those channels say, ooh, I need breadth of SKUs in order to meet my query volume in my searches, right? That's happening. And so they go to partner with the channels who have the most volume of SKUs first, right? We're seeing that in terms of kind of the first gates of partnerships that we're seeing publicly announced between folks like OpenAI and Walmart or others, right? So when you're a multi-brand retailer, your benefit, your like Myers-Briggs personality as a brand is different than if you're a branded manufacturer. Your benefit, your strengths are about your breadth of capability. And so I think there's a huge opportunity that we have in that category of retailers to understand the data sets that you have and to be really powerful and deliver that data at scale. Because in many cases, one of the biggest challenges that exists is, there's inconsistent data that doesn't perform optimally across channels. But if you want to be where the checkout happens, you are a merchant of record, meaning the agent places an order on your site. If you are the brand that has the best data on a specific category of products and therefore are answering the questions best when they show up on OpenAI, imagine how effectively you can compete when you have comprehensive data across a category, unlike a manufacturer.
Right. So they also have, so then one, to the first part, things like return policy, shipping speeds, the soft side of these retailers, I think, becomes very important. And you're also going to have to communicate to the agents, and that's going to be a big thing. But the customer doesn't really care where it comes from, but they may say like, oh, and make sure I can return it.
Or make sure I get my points for it.
Yeah,
Make
my
sure
loyalty
I get my
points.
Loyalty is a big part of that. And then to the other part, it's not just about who has the best, most complete data. Now you're going to start getting into price and discounts and maybe loyalty points, right? So how does that show up in feeds? And I think this will lead into a question of like, how do we run promotions through feeds, and how do we do all this merchandising through this? Because retailers know I can merchandise on my sites. I can merchandise in a few places. It's probably hard to merchandise in like the Google product grid. But like, how is this going to happen in the LLM world?
Or is it a better way of saying is like nobody ever really cared about Google Shopping, right? And how does this turn into, if this is really going to succeed, how does it just not be another version of Google Shopping?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting when you talk about Google Shopping is like you're saying as an individual product, but Google Search, a lot of people care about because it drives a really significant amount of volume, right? Totally different. But the data that underpinned both of those experiences is actually the same. It's the data that lived in Google Merchant Center. So when we talk about, I love this question, what data do you need to send to the channels in order to have them merchandise you in the way that you want to show up? This is where we start, we've thought about this problem really deeply, as you can imagine, because when we work with 30% of the Internet Retailer 1000, and they have the same question, which is how do I get the answer engine to say my name instead of my competitor's name? Well, it has to do with the data, because they're not it's not a storefront experience you own, right? And so what the information you are either making available for the answer engine to scrape from your own .com, AEO, GEO, right, is that practice, or that you're externalizing in a feed so that they can ingest directly to their veins so it lives in the mind of the answer engine.
Yep.
They say your name. This is where there's this huge focus on data feed management and orchestration in this new era. Because imagine you have an amazing, pair of shoes that is really good for running, but it's not really good for travel or leisure or, some of these other use cases. Or imagine you have a laptop that has very specific specifications, including a few areas that would really indicate whether it should be merchandised in a set of queries around, is this good for your 9-year-old who's looking for, and doesn't have the parental features that you need. So all of a sudden your product data enrichment strategy becomes really critical. You need to be able to auto-generate all of the attributes that these LLMs use to answer questions. You want to be able to create question and answer pairs around, is this linen dress really good to wear in Italy when it's hot? Right? Like, you need to be able to make sure that the context exists in the product descriptions and in the data that you're sending to these channels, so it can based on queries.
I guess that story makes sense to me. However, it is a muscle that the brands haven't had to really exercise to that level. And to be fair, like if you go into the retail media discussions that happen in a JBP situation, what the mismatch between the brand and the retailer is always on the fact that the retailer cares more about the category and the brand cares more about their own brand and their own sales.
Yep.
And what I'm interested in figuring out when we were talking about this in our prep call was this concept of agent to agent. And in a world where there's agents connecting with each other, the entity with better data has a better chance to, provide better context. And the retailer, knowing the whole basket or understanding cross-category data and things like that, is going to perform better than, a toothpaste brand that potentially doesn't have a lot of connection to the rest of the travel industry, right? And so it's like, I need toothpaste for when I'm traveling, but it doesn't know about Matador's, toothpaste containers or, you know what I mean? Like, it's not going to be able to data enrich to that extent. Whereas a retailer could, and maybe they need to sort of get better even at being retailers and merchandisers. But I feel like there's something missing here where it's like, you could force the brands to go crazy with this stuff, but they're still kind of like, buy my product, not buy a whole set of products or a whole category of products.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with all of your assessments around the strengths and pros and cons of being each one, right? Because there's always been kind of this interesting relationship between the brands who make the products and the retailers who sell them, right? Like that's like not a new thing. It's just we're in a new channel where that's the case. And I think what's really interesting is I kind of use this joke about Myers-Briggs personalities of brands because they all have their different strengths, right? You can be fast, or if you're a manufacturer, you know the depth of that product, you know how it was manufactured, you know everything about it, but you don't have that category level information. Whereas if you're a multi-brand retailer, you know how this relates to the context of, all the rest of everything that's being merchandised for Valentine's Day or for, whatever seasonal upcoming holiday is coming up. So it's like there's pros and cons of the data that you can put to work based on what like if you look at like Dick's Sporting Goods or REI or other, multi-brand retailers, they have become amazing experts at very specific niche areas where they can give you context around this one versus that one. So if I was on the data team or the marketing team who is powering agentic on some of those teams, I would be focused very much on what we've heard a lot of our customers say, which is I need to get my data in order because we know in this new world, the data is the storefront. That how you externalize your data, whether it's on an owned property, that is being, traversed by humans or now increasingly by agents, whether it's an owned.com or whether that's data you're feeding to your own agent that you're offering on a .com experience, or whether it's the data that you're sending to, these third parties that are driving the discovery across the, the whole catalog of retailers now. I think what we know is that the substrate, the most important layer is, are you getting the data right to be able to answer questions that agents now are surfacing wherever the data is coming from? So, that's one of the areas that I think is the biggest focus. And certainly you mentioned at the top of the call, I think why we're seeing so much interest in this category of data management and orchestration.
Well, one of the things when Matt Crawford and I were talking, I was kind of wondering, for many cycles, like when I was at Quotient, I would sit in meetings at Albertsons where we were the retail media partner and Google was trying to come in and take our business. And they couldn't because Google wasn't in this transaction world. They had tons of data, but they didn't have that final transaction or a loyalty program, to your point. Now they and Meta and others could potentially be in this world. I think there's a lot of questions about, Walmart's partnership with OpenAI and other setups. Like, are they giving away the store and allowing Google and Meta to have a bigger role in commerce now? Or is it still just another channel and, they're still sort of locked out of seeing the transactions?
I think it's pretty early to say. So here, let me give you some analysis around that. What we know that they're the ones with the eyeballs, right? If people are using the consumer apps, what are you going to do? Not be on the channels where everybody's actually discovering products? You have to do.
Yeah, I think we all agree that this is like, I use it all day long.
Yep.
I use it for harder products, not really as much for, products I buy all the time. Mm-hmm. But I think there's real disruptions going to happen. So totally agree with you there.
Let's talk about Google as an example. So Google has one of the best understandings of the products of the world ever, because they've been running product listing ads with Google Merchant Center data for like a decade, right?
Yep.
So they know
the fundamentals.
They have a foundational understanding of all the products on the internet. And because they have the ability to send local inventory and real-time inventory availability, they actually know not only what products you have, they know where they're located. And so that data set is really powerful. So when you wire that up with something they also own, Google Pay, which is a wallet that knows the consumer's identity.
Forgot about that one. Yeah.
Because think about, and it's already pre-integrated to all the payments companies in the world on .coms, right? What's really interesting here is we are bifurcating all of the data sets, right? So it used to be that tax calculation, shipping calculation, order routing, payment all happen within an e-commerce checkout, right? Like on an e-commerce site. Well, now catalog can be sent directly to the channel, which has been the case for ads, but you can have that collapsed funnel where that checkout experience happens, but they have to know the consumer because otherwise there's a fraud problem. So the companies with wallets who know consumers and merchants are in a really interesting position here, which is why you've seen people like PayPal and Stripe and Google start to issue new protocols to the world that says, here's how we're going to hand the data back and forth, because now this checkout is not happening on owned.com experiences. It's actually happening agentically. It's being captured within this agentic experience, but the merchant remains merchant of record. So we're going to go process it agentically on their existing systems in some cases to make sure that the merchant can actually fulfill or, provide a return or et cetera.
Right.
And so that dynamic, that change, it's not an ads channel, it's not a marketplace, it's a third thing. And so when we talk about Google needing to release Universal Commerce Protocol, we were one of the first partners that were announced the day they announced it. We saw the protocol and gave feedback on it early, because when you have tens of thousands of merchants on an e-commerce platform, in addition to sending feeds, we've got a pretty good understanding around what data is needed in order to be able to support that experience. And so Universal Commerce Protocol is Google's approach to how they're doing agentic because they have really unique assets. They have catalog data that's been powering ads for a long time, Google Pay, and they have a concept of loyalty and they have business agents who already know about a merchant's brand. They can already talk about a brand and its capabilities on their own Google-owned experiences, right? Across YouTube, Google, AI summaries on Gemini, et cetera. And so it's a really interesting landscape change because if we compare them to, say, someone like OpenAI, a new entrant in the market who doesn't have a Google Merchant Center to speak of, right? They don't have a concept of catalog data across the world the way Amazon or Google or Microsoft do.
They need it. A merchant center.
I know.
Let alone Google Merchant Center.
They don't have a merchant center that can consume that data and dedupe what they're scraping and align it to, this is the merchant ID and the SKU ID, and here's the transaction ID that allows us to, pop up this button for checkout to happen. So it's a really interesting dynamic because new channels who have the eyeballs aren't necessarily the ones who have the data at scale. You talk about like Microsoft. They have Microsoft Merchant Center. People have been running Microsoft Bing ads for a really long time. They actually have a really comprehensive data set around around catalog that could make them a really interesting player, which is why you're seeing them in the space. So I think, and then when you think about partners like Perplexity, we're powering live agentic checkout experiences on Perplexity in partnership with PayPal and Commerce, because they've gone and done a partnership really quickly that said, hey, PayPal, you can get me what I need from a catalog and from a payment and a wallet and an identity and a fraud perspective, and then route the order to a merchant system in partnership with Commerce. Let's do it. So we're starting to see some really interesting partnership dynamics emerge, because anytime you run a new protocol, the first partners who get to the protocol have the market. And then it expands because the protocols are public, right? So that we saw that with the Universal Commerce Protocol. We saw it with Agentic Commerce Protocol with ACP. And so I think we're in this kind of funny early innings moment in time where eventually, just like Google schema.org and the Google Merchant Center schema kind of became a standard that everybody adopted, we're still in early innings, but the channel partners and their ecosystem of partners are still kind of building the rails on which the new data will need to flow to power these experiences.
So you've seen this happen a couple of times. You've been there 6 years. You probably saw a fair number of these evolutions turn over. From the perspective that you have here, what do you think happens next? Like, what's coming?
Well, I think what's always interesting is when you start to consider complexity and fulfillment, right? So one of the biggest challenges that you have as a merchant is the categories that are easy to buy with a thumbprint. I call them TikTok categories. It's things like consumer electronics, apparel, footwear, something that fits in a box that's like this that can be easily shipped to you. Let's imagine that you're a furniture retailer or a manufacturer. It's kind of hard to make sure that those channels have all of the things that you need for your custom upholstery, for your white glove delivery, for the insurance that you need to have on the truck when it's delivered to that person's living room. That complexity.
But this is really relevant, because these are the types of things that I envision myself needing ChatGPT to help me figure out whether I buy.
Yeah, and so that's why it's a third thing. It's not a marketplace. It is both a discovery. It's both. It's both a discovery.
Well, yeah, but like when you think about it, I think we're all thinking about this in the old channels mode, because Scott went straight to price comparison, right? And my experience right now is like trying to buy ski equipment or something, and I'm like, yes, price is a factor, but that's not the only thing I care about here. If that were the case, I would just buy the lowest price thing, but that's not going to satisfy the consumer.
I'm not here catching strays from Tom over here. So it's a good point though. Like, what is this? If it's not product feeds, how do you get like checkout structure into it to know like all the things that I need to really fulfill your order? Where does that come from?
Yeah, I love this question. If it's not the catalog data, how do you make sure you're surfacing the tax calculation for that order?
The tax calculation, the color of the upholstery, be like, it's in there, but like we need a custom builder thing or.
Yeah. So that's why when everybody says, oh, websites are dead, I roll my eyes, because they're not dead. They're just changing. Guys, like, you will always have a website is the way a brand communicates who they are to the world. It's what they own. It's their ability to say, I have better tools. Imagine if you wanted to be able to go to a furniture brand's website and talk to their agent that could custom design you that room for you based on all that information. So it's actually an amazing opportunity for these experiences, these branded experiences, to really morph. Oh my gosh, the landing pages, they got so boring, and every product landing page looked exactly the same. It was like, we have sameness forever. I'm so glad that we're to a place where the sameness has been abstracted now with an agent, and the uniqueness around what brands can offer will be visualized on these .coms, because that's
but their agentic capabilities are going to suck for the short term. So like, is there a whisper protocol? It would be like, take all my stuff from ChatGPT over.
Or like a handoff, be like, you know what? I actually can't buy this couch for you. You should go to the website.
To be clear, like on these answer engines, if the data that you need to buy this product doesn't exist, merchants are able to elect in the data. Like, I'll just be really tactical. When you send a feed to these channels, you have the ability to say, make this one available for checkout. Don't make this one available for checkout.
Yeah.
If I'm a furniture
lead gen engine.
I'm saying couch, not available for agentic checkout. Pillow, yes, available for agentic checkout, right? So that's all managed in the feed that's getting sent to the channel that says enable this or don't enable this. Now, for some channel, it's like, It's a little bit more butcher knife on the early channels where maybe they don't have those controls, but they're working very fast to fix that. So that's like a matter of weeks. It's not even worth talking about.
Have the companies ingesting these product feeds for agentic things handed out sort of a spec or requirement for like, here's where we want the question and answer things of, is this linen dress nice in Italy? Like, have they said this is where you put it and this is what it should say?
Yeah, so it depends on the channel, right? So as you can imagine, Google with Universal Commerce Protocol has done that. They've said, here's the way we want you to send catalog. Here's the merchant center fields that you need to be able to support. So we, of course, working very closely with them, knew what those protocols were and implemented them literally overnight so that when somebody says, hey, I've been accepted to the Google Commerce, to the Universal Commerce Protocol program, we say, great, your feed's already ready. Go ahead and send it over to them.
They need to go fill in all the information.
Well, they can, or they can use our service that automatically fills it in based on all the data we already know about them, right? So if you have
like if the dress is like a Q&A of is this dress good for Italy in the summer?
Exactly, right? We can literally generate using like us and others can automatically generate data based on all the things that we need or know about your product and what the new channels need. So we can automatically use AI vision to analyze the products and understand what the attributes are. It's a short sleeve shirt with black polka dots, and we can automatically generate that data into the catalog and send it to the channel.
So that actually, to me, because I remember hearing the Perplexity guy talking about, hey, ads are going to be for agents. And I don't think that's the case, but attributes are, and using computer vision to analyze images that are on a site and things like that makes sense to me. I still don't really know the handoff, I think is the issue for me. Like who's going to stop doing the work in their platform to actually go to the other one? Because right now, if you use one of these agentic browsers, it's a nightmare. Like, it's like, I don't know if you play with like OpenClaw or whatever, but it's like, I got through the first hoop. I'm now going into this. I'm going looking at a picture. Now I looked at a whole bunch of pictures. I'm going to go and I forgot to do this. Like, it's a terrible experience. And so I'm just trying to figure out like, how does this become smooth? And right now I don't see any, understanding of how this becomes smooth. I think from your perspective, you're showing how things can be automated, like data can be filled and things like that. But I still don't really sort of like the rules of working. And I guess that's what's going to happen is here. The protocol can't do all of the work. I'm envisioning like a to A JBP program, but I don't know if that'll ever happen.
Well, Google's already produced an A to A protocol, right? That eventually so let's talk about where we are versus where we're going. Sharon, it used to be a shopper to merchant relationship. Sharon would go to a website, right?
Yep.
Go to anthropology.com looking for that dress. Now I ask ChatGPT or I ask Gemini, hey, I'm looking for a dress to wear to my friend's wedding in Italy and I'm looking for a size 10 and it needs to be made of linen because it's going to be super hot in July. And it says, hey, and I say, and I usually like Anthropologie. Can you recommend some other brands for me that I should consider? And it says, hey, here's some options for you, right? That's what we would call an agent to shopper experience. Very soon, there will be a agent to agent experience where a shopper agent and a merchant agent talk and negotiate on our behalf. But that doesn't exist right now because merchants don't have agents yet. But that's what they're building. They can and they will. And a lot of the very technology forward ones are starting to leverage the same technology to be able to build agents that know everything about them because they have the data. They're the ones with all those product specialists who have YouTube videos who've said why this product versus that one is so good and this one's good for that and that. That's data the brand owns. And so they can put that together and train their own agents. So let's imagine you're Caterpillar and you are a B2B brand and you sell, heavy, farm equipment and you know exactly what the replacement part is for that, skid steer that somebody bought. I am so excited about what brand agents are going to be able to do for the B2B ecosystem. Because if you're a B2B buyer and you say, hey, I bought this tractor and I need a replacement part, can you please find the one for me? Or, hey, I need to be able to, run a PO for these 120 items that I previously bought, just order them all again. Those processes are so manual and terrible. And so it's why we've released a purchase order agent for B2B brands to be able to address that. So I think when we talk about agentic, there's like agentic third-party channels that all of us know every day and love, like ChatGPT and Gemini and Perplexity. And then there's what brands are building that will be owned by the brand, fed by the data that only they have. And so when we talk about why would they participate, the answer is some of them might not. Because if you're a B2B merchant, if you can't surface your unique customer price list within that shopping channel, you're not going to want to do it. You'll want to make sure that the catalog is there so that when somebody's looking for that, they know that website over there has this product available. They're the ones who have replacement parts for the Caterpillar skid steer, but you might not surface pricing, right? You might surface it or you might surface a list price and know that that's where the real pricing happens, because it's about, loyalty or customer entitlements based on, your customer group. So I'm actually really excited because agentic is an equal opportunity, whether it's on third-party channels or whether it's on owned channels like the brand agents you're building. So that's why we're seeing a lot of the brands today say, I have this data. It needs to feed both my acquisition channels, third-party, but also the new agents that I'm about to build on my own experience. And I think that that's where a huge amount of opportunity for your multi-brand retailers lives. Because imagine if I go on to REI's normal.com and I'm a loyalist and I have so many points that I want to spend there, and their brand agent shows up and I say, hey, I'm taking my kids camping for the first time. My daughter just turned 6. What gear do I need? Think how powerful that agent is in helping me buy a bunch of stuff. Yeah. So anyway, that's how I think about that.
I really enjoy this. Let me bring back some doom and gloom for us here. As the middleman.
Before you do the doom and gloom, I just want to say thank you for coming on and having that. You have the product catalog in your head somehow, so you have an ability to talk through these examples. You went from John Deere skid steers to Italian linen dresses to camping gear. So nice work.
Very true. I would also like to take a picture of the skid steer and submit that and be like, that's the thing that's broken, and circle it with a red thing and be like, you AI deal with that.
This is possible now. The future is here.
The future is here. But let's talk about who the future does not include. And who is this like bad news for?
Okay.
I think this is going to turn into a segment, Scott. The bad news,
bad news.
Okay, well,
I mean, there's some companies that I agree with you that internet's not going away. Websites will still be around, but one of two effects will happen. Either a large percentage of your web traffic will go away and become agentic, and so you have to rethink your investments in traditional MarTech.
Yep.
That's really, I think, the thing that will happen. So in that, like, let's talk about some areas that might have some exposure and risk to it, which are the middle people. Because people aren't visiting your website, abandoned cart and retargeting and even newsletter sign up probably gets really difficult. Would you agree?
I think it depends.
In an agentic universe, they can still go to their site and do that stuff. But like in this agentic shopping universe, is there as much room for that? Do you think the agent will be like, would you like to sign up for their newsletter?
I do think the agent will say that.
And not a paid ad.
Yeah, I think when we think about what functionality do .coms need, it's the same functionality that's already existed, but where there becomes pressure, I think, is, people can vibe code websites like overnight. It's amazing. Like we live in the future. It's so exciting. I used to, work at web agencies for like back in the day, and it's like what used to take 3 months and $300,000 now you can do overnight, and like Claude Code can one shot it. It's like amazing. But what I think is like really interesting is when we think about those third parties that are currently like niche SaaS providers, where they're kind of like holding accounts and putting, taking data from one place and putting it to another. Those are the ones that I think are at serious risk, because the ability to get data from place to place has never been easier. It's never been easier to create, it's a super communicative ecosystem where agents can now build connectors between, app ecosystems very, very straightforward. So I think the platforms are going to remain because they have a lot of data, right? And a lot of access to ability to surface that data or look at it holistically in order to identify insights that allow you to take action. I think if you are a niche software player who only does kind of one very narrow thing, the risk of you becoming a feature of a platform instead of a company is very high. So that's talking about it generally. You can talk about categories if you like, but I think that's how I would characterize that generally.
Yep, we're going to talk about some specifics because the ability for like retargeting, right? You don't really get to retarget these users, and there's a good example of like, well, if they're on Google Shopping and they click and they see your product, but then they go to the other one, you don't get that user anyways. But that's kind of the point. So the people who are providing a retargeting solution for the brand or the retailer may not get as much opportunity to retarget, which would inherently be bad for the company providing the retargeting service.
Yeah, if they don't, change the way all the rest of us do in terms of what value that those companies offer. So I think if you're a software company and you see the new ecosystem, and let's imagine all of the new, and to kind of counter your doom and gloom, there's brand new technology companies out there that never exist. Like, look at the category of like.
I'm very hopeful for many things. Yeah. I'm very hopeful for many things.
If you're in the game of I want to understand consumer traffic on sales channels, that's what I would say retargeting is. You're in the game of understanding how are consumers interacting across sales channels. We've seen an entire new explosion of these LLM visibility channels. Think about Profound and Scrunch and every other competitor that's popped up overnight, where they're simulating session data using persona specific queries, and then doing a whole bunch of simulated sessions and licensing a bunch of data from all over the place in order to be able to say, hey, we know these LLMs haven't delivered analytics APIs for us to give you yet, but here's what might be happening, and don't you need to optimize your data in order to be able to perform there? So my response to your if you say you're a retargeting company, maybe there's a challenge for you. But if what you actually are is understanding how to help merchants or customers continue to know who are their shoppers and where are they and get at them, they, like all the rest of us, are going to have to figure out how to operate in this world. Are e-commerce platforms who are not participating and figuring out how to build to the new protocols going to be in trouble? Yeah, they are. But that's why we're doing that as fast as, hopefully faster than our competition is.
And then what about on the data and identity side, where I'll just leave that as the question. How does the data and identity ecosystem change with this new channel? Or do we think of it as the same way of when Google Shopping took traffic? How do we think about what happens to data, identity, the graph providers, the onboarders?
Yeah, I think at once they become both very, very important, but also under deep threat, right? Because let's think about where that discussion happens. So let's imagine that you are a fraud provider and you've got a really good understanding, and you're already of where that experience of that, let's do a fraud call during a checkout happens. Right now, it's been happening on the .coms. And so these fraud providers have deep integrations to e-commerce platforms, right? But if the checkout experience has now just changed in these agentic channels, and the person who's doing that fraud call is actually a payment provider with a wallet, sounds like they better go build integrations into those companies really fast, right? Or build partnerships where, hey, we're already integrated here, you're already integrated there, let's make sure that data can flow cleanly.
And then so you might see similar volume of fraud check or anti-fraud checks. I think they're not a fraud provider. They're probably an anti-fraud provider, but yeah. I'm with you. So same volume of anti-fraud checks potentially, but fewer individual buyers of technology. So whereas you might have a million websites to sell your service to, you might be down to 100 of these agentic commerce checkout platforms. Or and certainly if it gets rolled up into a payment provider, now you're looking at 6.
Yeah, well, or like we said, websites aren't going away, so there will still be volume through websites. So but what you're saying is there might be less to eat, right, on those sites. So I think certainly understanding.
And then when you want to when you're saying agentic is going to explode the volume of commerce that's going to happen in the world, the truth is that there isn't room for 1,000 providers to service 10 million customers. There's going to be room for fewer providers to service what might only be 10 people who need to actually buy that service.
Maybe. I think that's a little more doom and gloom than I would get to, because I think that assumes an adoption rate that we're not yet seeing. As you say, I think that there's going to be a lot, at the same rate that we are identifying changes happening in the tectonic plates of who owns that shopper experience moving towards agentic. Yeah. What we also know is that there's a lot of products that can't be surfaced and bought with a thumbprint on the agentic surface. And so that cohort, right, products where maybe the answers you have won't be answered directly within that experience. It's just that the checkouts are in the same way that you had .coms and you had marketplaces and everyone's like, oh, with Amazon, websites are going away. That didn't happen, did it? It didn't. You still have branded websites.
Okay, I'm totally with you. And I think I have one more question that I just have to ask your opinion. if you're providing this product information, discovery things, it's more than just the color, the shape, the size. Where do you think the chatbot LLM like starts and stops with doing its own research versus just reading and trusting what's in the file that's provided in the feed? Like, what if they're like, actually, I don't think that that's a good dress for Italy in the summer because XYZ, and it starts disobeying the file? Like, is this a concern, or am I just super out on a limb here?
No, it's a super valid concern. I think the answer is, if those channels are trying to sell you ads, which they are, they're going to need to get it right. And I think that we've seen them, each channel has its own tuning of how much are they summarizing that information that they're scraping off of the internet, and what are the sources they're scraping it from, right? Like if you say, hey, I want to know about this brand, and the brand's providing information, which is an authoritative source on product data, generally speaking, and you've got data that you're scraping from websites, not just the brand's website, but on social experiences or coming from Reddit or Quora or, like the world's opinion about that brand.
Quora, I haven't heard that in a while. Okay.
I never thought that Quora was going to be a reputable source of cited data in 2026. And yet here we are. It's often showing up as referenceable site, right? So what I think is really interesting is that marketers now need to have this multi-channel approach to how they're validating the social proof of those products, whether it's reviews, there's brand provided information there, and then there's consumer validated information, and then there's where else does it live? And so
a little bit of hallucinated information. Yeah.
And so I think you're going to say, oh no, brands don't have control of that. No, they don't. And you know what? They haven't had control over that on search for a long time. It's going to that's just going to amp it up. And so it becomes even more important for them to have like an AEO, GEO strategy that's multi-channel, not just their own .com.
Yeah.
Great.
This has been fascinating. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you so much. We put you through the ringer on the questions, but you really performed. So thank you. And thank you for joining the Middlemen.
I appreciate that. Thanks for the time, guys.